My grandchildren kicked me out when I lost my pension, but they didn't know I had just. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just returned from my weekly bridge game at the senior center, still buoyed by the rare victory my partner and I had managed against the reigning champions, Mabel and Greta. I didn't open the letter right away. The official envelope from Northern Trust Bank looked ominous, and I'd learned long ago not to let unpleasant matters intrude on happy moments. Instead, I set it on the kitchen counter, brewed myself a cup of Earl Grey, and savored the lingering satisfaction of the afternoon's triumph. Only when the tea was finished did I slit open the envelope with the brass letter opener Mark had given me for our 35th anniversary. The contents were as bad as I'd feared. After 6 months of scraping to make partial payments on my reverse mortgage, the bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings. I had 30 days to vacate the premises. My hands trembled as I read the letter a second time, hoping I'd misunderstood something crucial. But the language was clear and unequivocal. After 30 years in the cozy Cape Cod where Mark and I had raised our son Daniel, where we'd welcomed our grandchildren for holidays and summer vacations, where I'd nursed my husband through his final illness, I was being evicted. It wasn't entirely unexpected. When the pension fund that had supported me since Mark's death suddenly collapsed 3 months earlier, victim to some complex financial malfeasance I still didn't fully understand, I knew hard decisions were coming. My Social Security payments barely covered utilities, food, and the medications my insurance didn't fully cover. The reverse mortgage had seemed like a lifeline when I'd signed the papers 2 years earlier, a way to tap the equity in my home, without having to move. I'd planned carefully, calculating that the monthly payments would supplement my pension and Social Security long enough for me to remain in my home until I no longer needed a home. None of those calculations had accounted for the pension disappearing overnight. I folded the letter neatly, returned it to its envelope, and placed it in the drawer where I kept important documents. Then I did what any sensible woman of 78 would do. I poured myself a small sherry, called my friend Eleanor, and had a good cry. "You'll stay with me, of course," Eleanor declared when I'd calmed enough to explain the situation. "The guest room is yours for as long as you need it." "That's incredibly generous," I said, touched by her immediate offer. "But you know that's not a long-term solution. Your condo barely has room for you and all those ceramic cats." "My collection is not that extensive," she sniffed, though we both knew the small 2-bedroom unit was already overcrowded with her beloved feline figurines. "But what about Daniel? Surely he and Meredith have room in that big house of theirs." I hesitated. Daniel and his wife lived in a substantial colonial in an upscale suburb of Boston, nearly 4 hours away. Their youngest had just left for college, leaving them with 2 empty bedrooms. Logically, it made sense. Emotionally, it was complicated. "I haven't told him yet," I admitted. "He's been under so much pressure at work lately, and Meredith is busy with that charity gala she chairs every year. I don't want to add to their stress." Eleanor made a sound that clearly communicated her opinion of my reticence. "Catherine Martin, you stop that right now. Your son would want to know you're about to lose your home. Call him today." She was right, of course. Daniel should be informed, regardless of how uncomfortable the conversation might be. After extracting a promise that I would indeed reach out to my son immediately, Eleanor let me end the call. I spent several minutes rehearsing what I would say, trying to find words that would explain my predicament without sounding pitiful or demanding. Before I could dial, however, the phone rang in my hand. The caller ID displayed Daniel Sell. For a moment, I wondered if Eleanor had somehow contacted him behind my back, but quickly dismissed the thought. More likely, one of those coincidences that seem to occur with increasing frequency as one ages, thinking of someone just before they call. "Hello, sweetheart," I answered, keeping my voice light and cheerful. "Mom, thank goodness I caught you." Daniel sounded harried, his words coming in a rush. "I've been trying to reach you all day." I was at bridge with the ladies, I explained. Is everything all right? Yes, fine, just busy. He paused, and I could almost see him running a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from his father. Listen, Mom, I have some news. Remember I mentioned that project in Singapore? Well, it's happening. The firm wants me to head up the new office there. Singapore? That's wonderful, Daniel. I tried to infuse the words with genuine enthusiasm, though my mind was racing to process what this might mean for my current situation. When would you leave? That's the thing. It's all moving incredibly fast. Meredith and I fly out next. Monday for a 10-day visit to find housing and get the lay of the land. Then we'll come back for just 3 weeks to pack up and handle the logistics. The firm wants me on site by the end of next month. My heart sank. So soon? What about your house? We're putting it on the market next week. The real estate market is hot right now, so our agent thinks it will sell quickly. He paused again. Actually, Mom, that's partly why I'm calling. With everything happening so fast, Meredith and I have been discussing what to do about, well, family matters. Family matters? I echoed, though I had a sinking feeling about where the conversation was heading. Yes, making sure everyone is taken care of while we're halfway around the world. Another pause. We've been talking with Jason and Emma. They think, and we agree, that it might make sense for you to sell your house and move into assisted living. Somewhere with staff who can keep an eye on you, especially with us so far away. Jason and Emma, my grandchildren. At 26 and 24, they were barely adults themselves, yet apparently weighing in on what should happen to their grandmother. I felt a flash of indignation that quickly subsided into a dull ache of hurt. I see, I said carefully. And have you researched these assisted living facilities? Do you know what they cost? Daniel cleared his throat uncomfortably. Well, we thought you could use the proceeds from selling your house. The market's strong, as I mentioned. You should get a good price. I closed my eyes, feeling suddenly weary. How to explain that there would be no proceeds? That the reverse mortgage had consumed most of my equity? That the bank was foreclosing anyway? Daniel, I need to tell you something. I took a deep breath. I've had some financial setbacks. The pension fund collapsed. It was in the news a few months ago, and I've fallen behind on payments for the reverse mortgage I took out 2 years ago. Reverse mortgage? Mom, you never mentioned that. His tone held equal parts surprise and accusation. It didn't seem relevant at the time. I had everything under control until the pension stopped. I swallowed hard. The bank is foreclosing. I received the notice today. I have 30 days to vacate. The silence that followed was so prolonged I wondered if we'd been disconnected. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice noticeably cooler. Why didn't you tell me about any of this? The pension? The mortgage problems? I had no idea things were so serious. I didn't want to worry you, I said, the explanation sounding feeble even to my own ears. And I kept hoping the pension administrators would sort things out, that at least partial payments would resume. Mom, this is exactly why we think assisted living makes sense. If you're having trouble managing your finances— He let the sentence hang, the implication clear. I managed my finances perfectly well for decades, I said, a defensive edge creeping into my voice. This situation was beyond my control. The pension fund managers were indicted for fraud, for heaven's sake. Daniel sighed, a sound that conveyed fatigue and frustration in equal measure. Regardless, we need to figure this out quickly. Obviously, the assisted living plan requires modification if you don't have proceeds from a house sale. Eleanor has offered her guest room temporarily, I said. That would give me time to sort through my options. That's kind of her, but it's not a solution. Daniel was using his problem-solving voice now, the one he employed when approaching a challenging architectural design. Look, Meredith and I will be in Singapore. The house here will be sold. Jason has that tiny apartment in the city, and Emma's still in graduate student housing." He didn't need to complete the thought. There was nowhere for me in any of their lives, at least nowhere convenient. "What about using some of your retirement savings to help me find an affordable apartment?" I suggested, hating that I needed to ask but seeing few alternatives. Another uncomfortable silence. "Mom, most of our liquid assets are being invested in the Singapore move. The firm is covering the basics, but establishing ourselves there is costly. International schools for the younger kids, housing in one of the world's most expensive cities." He sighed again. "We can help some, but not enough for an indefinite housing situation." The conversation continued in this vein for another 15 minutes. Circular discussions of limited options, none of them appealing. Daniel promised to talk with Meredith and the grandchildren again to see what they could work out. I promised to explore affordable senior housing options, though we both knew the waiting lists for such facilities typically stretched for years, not months or weeks. When we finally hung up, I sat motionless in my kitchen, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of the home I would soon lose. The gentle tick of the anniversary clock on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator Mark had insisted on upgrading. Just before his diagnosis, the view through the window of the maple tree we'd planted on our 10th anniversary, now majestic in its maturity. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, research, and mounting anxiety. Daniel called back with news that was presented as a solution, but felt more like a stopgap. Jason had reluctantly agreed that I could stay in his apartment while he relocated to his sister's place temporarily. They would help with the move and provide a small monthly stipend for food and incidentals while I continued to search for affordable senior housing. "It's just until we get settled in Singapore and can reassess our financial situation," Daniel explained. "Maybe in 6 months or so, we can look at helping you secure something more permanent." I thanked him, biting back the observation that at 78, temporary housing solutions took on a different meaning than they might for someone younger. 6 months represented a significant percentage of my remaining lifespan, however long that might be. The following week brought a flurry of activity as Daniel and Meredith flew in for a whirlwind 2-day visit before continuing to Singapore. Their time was divided between meeting with their real estate agent, sorting through items to be shipped internationally, and helping me begin the painful process of downsizing my possessions to fit into Jason's 1-bedroom apartment. "You really can't take much, Mom," Meredith advised, her tone gentle but firm as she surveyed my living room. "Jason's place is tiny, and already fully furnished. Mostly you'll need clothes and personal items. What about my books? My photo albums? Mark's collection of nautical maps?" I gestured helplessly at the shelves that lined one wall, filled with the accumulated treasures of a lifetime. "We'll put the important things in storage," Daniel assured me. "Once we're settled in Singapore and have a better handle on our finances, we can ship whatever you want to, wherever you end up permanently." It was meant to be comforting, I knew, but the casual reference to my belongings waiting in limbo, to my own future as a problem to be solved once more pressing matters were handled, it stung in ways I couldn't articulate without sounding ungrateful for their help. The day after Daniel and Meredith departed for Singapore, Jason arrived to continue the downsizing process and finalize plans for my move to his apartment. At 26, my grandson was a study in contradictions, a successful financial analyst with the social awkwardness of the bookish child he'd once been, a young man whose expensive clothes and haircuts couldn't quite disguise his discomfort in his own skin. "Gran," he said, giving me a quick, stiff hug before immediately stepping back. "Dad said you've started sorting your things?" "Yes, though it's difficult to know what to keep when I don't know where I'll ultimately end up." I led him into the dining room, where I'd begun creating piles. Items to take to his apartment, things for storage, donations for charity. Jason surveyed the piles with visible concern. "That's a lot of stuff for the keep pile, Gran. My place really is small. Like, really small." "I understand," I said, though my heart sank at the confirmation. I'm trying to be ruthless, but some decisions are harder than others. He picked up a porcelain figurine from the keep pile, a small shepherdess Mark had brought back from a business trip to Dresden, one of the few items I'd allowed myself to designate as essential. This stuff is nice, but is it necessary? You know what I mean? Like it's just going to collect dust. I gently took the shepherdess from his hands and returned it to the pile. Some things have value beyond their utility, Jason. This was a gift from your grandfather. Having it near me brings comfort. He shrugged, clearly not understanding but unwilling to argue the point. Whatever you say. But the apartment really can't accommodate much more than your clothes and toiletries. Maybe a few books if they're small. The comment was so absurd, as if the physical dimensions of books were the determining factor in their importance, that I nearly laughed. Instead, I nodded and continued sorting, now with an even more critical eye toward what could realistically accompany me into exile. Over the next 2 weeks, Jason and Emma, when she could spare time from her graduate studies, helped me pare down my possessions to what would fit in 4 suitcases and 6 medium-sized boxes. Everything else was either donated to charity, sold for pitiful sums at a hastily organized estate sale, or placed in a small storage unit Jason had reluctantly agreed to fund for 6 months. After that, we'll need to reassess, he'd said, in an unconscious echo of his father's phrasing. Storage gets expensive over time. The day of the move arrived with brutal finality. I stood in the emptied living room, saying a private goodbye to the home that had sheltered 30 years of my life. The walls were bare, the furniture mostly gone, the rooms echoing with absence. All that remained were the ghosts of memories. Mark teaching Daniel to play chess by the fireplace, baby Emma taking her first steps across this very floor, family Christmases and Thanksgivings and ordinary Tuesdays made extraordinary by the simple fact of being surrounded by people I loved. Gran? The car's loaded. We should get going if we want to beat traffic. Jason stood in the doorway, keys in hand, clearly anxious to complete this obligation and return to his normal life. Just 1 more minute, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. I made a slow circuit of the downstairs rooms, trailing my fingers along walls and door frames, committing details to memory. Then, with a final glance toward the kitchen where Mark and I had shared thousands of meals and conversations, I turned and followed my grandson out the front door. The drive to Jason's apartment in the city took just under an hour, conducted mostly in silence. He made a few attempts at conversation, comments about a podcast he enjoyed, a question about whether I followed basketball, an observation about the traffic, but my monosyllabic responses eventually discouraged him. I was conserving emotional energy for what lay ahead, the effort of adapting to a new and diminished circumstance. Jason's apartment was exactly as he'd described, small. A glorified studio with a sleeping alcove separated from the main living area by a half wall. It was the kind of space designed for a single young professional who spent minimal time at home. The furnishings were sparse and utilitarian: a futon sofa, a coffee table that doubled as a dining surface, a desk wedged into a corner with a high-end computer setup that probably cost more than all my remaining possessions combined. So, you'll take the sleeping area, Jason explained, gesturing toward the alcove where a twin mattress sat on a low platform. I've cleared out the closet as much as possible, but I still need to keep some stuff in there if that's okay. The bathroom's through there. Kitchen's pretty basic, but it works. I nodded, taking in what would be my home for the foreseeable future. The space was clean but impersonal, devoid of the warmth or character that might make it feel welcoming. No photos on the walls, no books on display, despite his comment about small books being acceptable. Nothing to indicate that a human with interests or attachments lived here. It's very nice, Jason. Thank you for making room for me. I kept my tone warm and appreciative, determined not to burden him with my disappointment or discomfort. No problem. He checked his watch. Listen, I need to head over to Emma's place. That's where I'll be staying. She's expecting me by 7. Will you be okay getting settled in on your own? There's some basic stuff in the fridge, and I wrote down the Wi-Fi password on that notepad by the computer. I'll be fine, I assured him. Go ahead. And please thank Emma again for sharing her space with you. After a brief, awkward hug, he was gone, leaving me alone in the silent apartment with my suitcases and boxes stacked neatly by the door. I sank onto the futon, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of my situation. 24 hours ago, I'd been in my own home, surrounded by the accumulated evidence of a well-lived life. Now I was essentially homeless, dependent on the reluctant charity of grandchildren who clearly viewed me as an inconvenience to be managed. I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to wallow in self-pity, counted off on my watch, and then rose to begin unpacking. The sooner I organized my belongings in this new space, the sooner I might begin to feel some semblance of control over my circumstances. The next morning, I awoke disoriented in the unfamiliar bed, momentarily confused by the sound of traffic. Outside the window instead of the chirping birds that had been my wake-up call for decades. Reality crashed back quickly enough. The foreclosure, the move, the uncertain future stretching before me. I eased myself up, grimacing at the stiffness in my joints. The twin mattress was firm to the point of hardness, clearly chosen by someone, for whom orthopedic concerns were decades away. After navigating the small bathroom, bumping elbows against the shower wall, discovering too late that Jason's idea of toiletries didn't include extra toilet paper, I dressed in clothes retrieved from a suitcase and made my way to the kitchenette. The basic stuff Jason had mentioned consisted of half a carton of orange juice, a package of bagels, and a tub of cream cheese in the refrigerator. The cabinets held a few cans of soup, a box of pasta, and a jar of sauce. I made a mental note to find the nearest grocery store later that day, then set about preparing a simple breakfast of toasted bagel and juice. As I ate at the coffee table, perched on the edge of the futon, I contemplated my next steps. I had approximately $3,200 in my checking account, the proceeds from the estate sale plus what remained of my last Social Security payment after settling outstanding bills. My next payment would arrive in 3 weeks. Jason and Emma had promised a stipend of $400 monthly to supplement my income, which was generous but hardly sufficient to secure independent housing in this expensive city. The most logical course of action was to continue researching affordable senior housing options while adjusting to my temporary living situation. With that in mind, I retrieved my laptop from one of the boxes, set it up on the coffee table, and began my search. 3 hours later, I closed the computer, discouraged by what I'd found. The waiting lists for subsidized senior apartments stretched for years, not months. The few immediately available options required deposits and monthly rents far beyond my means. Assisted living facilities, as Daniel had initially suggested, were even further out of reach without the proceeds from a home sale. I was still sitting there, contemplating my limited options, when my cell phone rang. The display showed Emma Mobile. "Hello, sweetheart," I answered, genuinely pleased to hear from my granddaughter. "Hi, Gran. Just checking how you're settling. In at Jason's place." Emma's voice was warm, if a bit distracted. I could hear the sounds of a busy coffee shop in the background. "I'm managing," I said, keeping my tone upbeat. "The apartment is lovely, though quite compact. I'm still finding places for my things." "That's good." A pause. The sound of her thanking someone, presumably for delivering a coffee. "Listen, Gran. I wanted to let you know that I've been doing some research on senior community options. There's a place called Riverdale Gardens about 20 minutes from the city that looks promising. The waiting list for subsidized units is shorter than most, maybe 8 to 10 months. I felt a rush of gratitude that at least one family member was actively trying to help secure my future. "That's wonderful, Emma. Thank you for looking into it. Of course, I've submitted an application in your name to get you on the list. They needed some financial information, which Dad provided before they left for Singapore. Another pause. There's a $75 application fee. I paid it, but if you could reimburse me whenever convenient, that would be great. Absolutely, I agreed immediately. I can mail you a check today. No rush. Maybe just have it for me next time we see each other. The background noise on her end increased. Sorry, Gran, I need to run. My study group is arriving. I'll call you in a few days to check in, okay? Love you. Before I could respond, the call ended. I sat with the phone in my hand, processing the conversation. On one hand, Emma's proactive research was exactly the sort of help I needed. On the other, the casual way important decisions about my future were being made without my full participation. Submitting an application on my behalf, sharing my financial information, left me feeling uncomfortably sidelined in my own life. Still, beggars couldn't be choosers, as my mother would have said. And at present, I was essentially a beggar, dependent on others' goodwill until I could establish a more sustainable living situation. The days settled into a quiet rhythm. I explored the neighborhood, locating the nearest grocery store, pharmacy, and public library. I established small routines to give structure to days that suddenly stretched before me with little purpose. Morning walks when weather permitted, afternoons reading or watching documentaries on Jason's surprisingly large television, evenings spent writing long emails to friends who were concerned about my situation. Jason stopped by occasionally, usually to pick up mail or retrieve something he'd forgotten when moving his essential belongings to Emma's apartment. These visits were brief and awkward, characterized by his obvious discomfort and my efforts to appear grateful and undemanding. "Everything going okay?" he would ask, glancing around the apartment as if checking for damage. "Everything's fine," I would assure him. "I've been very comfortable." Emma was marginally more attentive, calling every few days and stopping by, once a week, usually with a prepared meal or baked goods from a local bakery. Her visits, while also brief, at least included genuine conversation and updates on her graduate studies in psychology. "I'm specializing in gerontology, actually," she told me during one such visit. "The psychological aspects of aging are fascinating, especially how people adapt to major life transitions." "How ironic," I observed with a wry smile. "You have a case study living in your brother's apartment." Emma had the grace to look embarrassed. "Gran, I didn't mean... That is, I wasn't suggesting..." "It's all right, dear. I was just making a joke." I patted her hand reassuringly. "I think it's wonderful that you're focusing on issues that affect older adults. Heaven knows we need more people who understand the challenges we face." The truth was, I was proud of Emma's academic achievements and her choice of specialty. If my current circumstances could provide insights that might eventually help her better serve other older adults, perhaps some good could come from this difficult situation. 6 weeks into my stay at Jason's apartment, I received an unexpected phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Assuming it was yet another telemarketer, I almost didn't answer. But something, perhaps the simple human desire for connection in a life that had become increasingly isolated, made me pick up. "Mrs. Catherine Martin?" A professional-sounding voice inquired. "Speaking," I confirmed, immediately on guard. In my experience, strangers who used my full name were usually trying to sell something, or, worse, perpetrate some sort of scam. "This is Lawrence Abernathy from Fillmore, Weston and Hayes. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Harold Jenkins. Do you have a moment to speak?" I frowned, trying to place the name. Harold Jenkins. It sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't immediately recall any connection. "I'm not sure I know a Harold Jenkins," I said cautiously. "Mr. Jenkins was a former colleague of your late husband, Mark Martin. They worked together at Northeastern Regional Bank in the 1980s and early 90s, I believe." The name clicked into place. "Oh, Harry Jenkins. Yes, of course. He and Mark were in the loan department together. They used to play racquetball on weekends. A memory surfaced of a tall, thin man with a booming laugh who had attended Mark's funeral. Has something happened? To Harry? I'm afraid Mr. Jenkins passed away 3 months ago, the attorney informed me. I'm contacting you because you are named as a beneficiary in his will. I sat down abruptly on the futon, stunned by this unexpected news. I'm sorry to hear of his passing, but I'm confused. Why would Harry include me in his will? We weren't particularly close, especially after Mark died. I can't speak to Mr. Jenkins's motivations, Mr. Abernathy replied, his tone neutral. I can tell you that the will specifies a significant bequest to you, along with a personal letter. That might explain his reasoning. Would it be possible for you to come to our offices to discuss the matter in person? We're located in downtown Boston. A significant bequest? From Harry Jenkins, a man I hadn't seen in years? It seemed improbable, possibly even suspicious. I'm afraid I'm not currently living in the area, I hedged, unwilling to commit to anything before understanding the situation better. Could you perhaps provide more details over the phone? There was a brief pause before Mr. Abernathy continued. I understand your caution, Mrs. Martin. Let me assure you this is entirely legitimate. Mr. Jenkins left you a cash bequest of $750,000, as well as his condominium in Harbor Towers. The property is fully paid off, with only the monthly association fees and property taxes as ongoing expenses. I gasped, certain I had misheard. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that amount? $750,000 in liquid assets, plus the condominium valued at approximately $1.2 million. My hand trembled as I gripped the phone. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen outside of movies or novels. Mysterious inheritances from barely remembered acquaintances, changing one's fortune overnight. There must be some mistake, I said finally. Why would Harry leave me such a sum? And his home? It doesn't make sense. As I mentioned, Mr. Jenkins left a letter addressed to you that may explain his reasoning. I'm not privy to its contents. Another brief pause. Mrs. Martin, I understand this is unexpected news. Take whatever time you need to process it. The bequest isn't going anywhere. When you're ready to move forward with claiming your inheritance, please contact our office. He provided contact information, which I wrote down mechanically, still in a state of shock. After assuring him I would be in touch soon, I ended the call and sat motionless, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Harry Jenkins. I searched my memory for details about the man who had apparently just transformed my life. He had been a few years older than Mark, never married, devoted to his career in banking. The two men had been friendly colleagues rather than close friends, occasionally socializing outside of work but drifting apart after Mark left the bank for a position with an investment firm. I recalled Harry attending Mark's funeral 7 years ago, offering quiet condolences and mentioning something about staying in touch, a courtesy that hadn't materialized into actual connection. Why would such a man leave me a fortune? It made no sense. Unless a thought struck me with sudden clarity. Mark had once mentioned helping Harry with some complex financial matter, restructuring debt or investments in a way that had apparently saved him from significant losses. Could this bequest be a delayed expression of gratitude for my husband's assistance all those years ago? Whatever the explanation, the practical implications were staggering. If this inheritance was legitimate, and I still harbored some skepticism, despite the professional demeanor of the attorney, my financial worries were over. I could afford my own home again. I could live independently for whatever years remained to me. I would no longer be a burden on my family. My family. The thought of Daniel, Meredith, and the grandchildren brought a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that I could release them from the obligation of supporting me. Sadness at how quickly they had shifted from treating me as a beloved family member to viewing me as a problem to be managed. And, I had to admit, a small petty part of me felt a certain satisfaction at the thought of their reactions when they learned of my sudden change in fortune. I spent the remainder of the day alternating between cautious optimism and certain conviction that the whole thing was an elaborate scam or cruel joke. By evening, I had resolved to verify the lawyer's legitimacy before proceeding further. A quick internet search confirmed that Fillmore, Weston, and Hayes was indeed a reputable law firm specializing in estate planning and probate matters. Lawrence Abernathy was listed as a senior partner, his professional biography noting over 30 years of experience in the field. Still proceeding with caution, I called the firm's main number the following morning, rather than the direct line Mr. Abernathy had provided, and asked to speak with him. After being transferred and briefly introducing myself, I was relieved to hear him confirm our conversation from the previous day. "I've been considering your offer to visit your offices," I said. "I believe I would like to proceed with that, if possible." "Excellent," he replied. "When would be convenient for you?" We settled on an appointment 3 days hence, giving me time to arrange transportation to downtown Boston. After ending the call, I sat for several minutes, contemplating the best approach to this unexpected development. Should I inform my family immediately, or wait until after meeting with the attorney, when I would have concrete details and documentation to share? The latter course seemed more prudent. Despite growing confidence in the legitimacy of the inheritance, I wanted absolute certainty before announcing such life-changing news. Besides, a small voice whispered, wouldn't it be more satisfying to present the family with a fait accompli rather than involving them in the process? That decided, I began preparing for the meeting, sorting through my limited wardrobe for appropriate attire and researching the location of the law firm to determine the most efficient route from Jason's apartment. The morning of the appointment arrived bright and clear, one of those perfect early autumn days that New England does so well. I dressed with care in a navy suit I'd worn to Mark's funeral and maintained for occasional formal events, accessorized with a simple strand of pearls he had given me for our 25th anniversary. Looking in the bathroom mirror, I was pleased to note that despite recent stresses, I still presented a dignified appearance, silver hair neatly styled, posture erect, clothing pressed and appropriate. The trip downtown went smoothly, a combination of subway and a short walk bringing me to the impressive glass and steel building housing Fillmore, Weston, and Hayes. The receptionist directed me to a conference room on the 32nd floor, where Lawrence Abernathy awaited, a substantial folder on the table before him. "Mrs. Martin, thank you for coming," he greeted me, rising to shake my hand. In person, he was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to dealing with substantial matters. "Thank you for accommodating me on relatively short notice," I replied, taking the offered seat across from him. "Not at all. I understand this situation is unexpected and likely overwhelming." He opened the folder, removing several documents. "Before we proceed with specifics, I want to address any lingering concerns you might have about the legitimacy of this inheritance. Everything has been properly probated through the Suffolk County courts. The bequest to you was clearly specified in Mr. Jenkins' will, which was properly executed and witnessed 3 years ago." He slid a copy of the relevant portion of the will across the table. I read it carefully, noting the precise legal language that left, to Catherine Elizabeth Martin, widow of Mark Andrew Martin, the sum of $750,000 plus my residence at Harbor Towers, Unit 2214, inclusive of all furnishings and personal property therein. "This appears to be in order," I said, returning the document. "Though I still don't understand why Harry would leave me such a generous bequest. Perhaps this will provide some insight." Abernathy handed me a sealed envelope with my name written on the front in a shaky hand. "Mr. Jenkins left this letter with explicit instructions that it be delivered to you personally." I accepted the envelope, turning it over in my hands for a moment before carefully breaking the seal. Inside was a single sheet of heavy stationery, covered in the same unsteady handwriting as the envelope. Taking a deep breath, I began to read. "Dear Catherine, if you're reading this, Then I've finally had the good grace to shuffle off this mortal coil, as Shakespeare would have it. I hope my passing was peaceful, though knowing my luck, it was probably something embarrassing like choking on a piece of steak at a restaurant. You're undoubtedly wondering why I've left you such a substantial inheritance when we were never more than casual acquaintances. The answer is simple, though the story behind it is not. In 1992, Mark helped me restructure my investments in a way that saved me from financial ruin after a series of poor decisions on my part. He never asked for compensation beyond his normal professional fees, despite the fact that his advice ultimately led to the wealth I've accumulated over the subsequent decades. But that's not the reason for this bequest. The truth is, Catherine, I was in love with you for over 40 years. The attorney estimates about 30 days for the deed transfer to be completed, I replied. Though I could potentially move sooner if allowed access by the property management company. I'll be looking into that this week. That's great, Gran. Really great. The relief in Jason's voice was unmistakable. Let me know if you need help with the move or anything. After ending the calls to my family, I sat quietly in Jason's apartment, processing the dramatic shift in my circumstances. Just hours ago, I had been a financial burden, reluctantly accommodated and discreetly considered a problem to be solved. Now I was suddenly self-sufficient, even wealthy by most standards, no longer dependent on anyone's charity or goodwill. The transformation was dizzying, and underneath the practical considerations lay the emotional complexity of Harry Jenkins' revelation. A man I barely remembered had harbored feelings for me for decades, silently observing my life from a respectful distance, ultimately bestowing his entire fortune upon me as a final expression of his unspoken affection. It was like something from a Victorian novel, both touching and slightly unsettling. Over the next few days, I began preparing for the next phase of my life. I contacted the property management company for Harbor Towers, explaining my situation, and requesting permission to view the condominium before the official transfer of ownership. To my pleasant surprise, they were accommodating, arranging for a representative to meet me at the building the following week. The day of the viewing dawned clear and crisp, a perfect early autumn morning. I dressed carefully, wanting to make a good impression on the building staff who would soon be managing my new home. The Harbor Towers complex was impressive, 2 distinctive 60-story buildings overlooking Boston Harbor, with stunning views of both the water and the city skyline. The lobby featured marble floors, tasteful modern artwork, and a staffed reception desk where residents could receive packages and visitors. Mrs. Martin? A professional-looking woman in her 40s approached as I entered. I'm Diane Lawson. From the management office. We spoke on the phone about Mr. Jenkins' unit. Yes, thank you for arranging this viewing. We shook hands, and she led me toward the elevators. Unit 2214 is on the 22nd floor, East Tower, Diane explained, as we ascended. It's a 2-bedroom corner unit with harbor views. Mr. Jenkins purchased it in 1998 and renovated about 5 years ago, so everything is relatively modern. The elevator doors opened directly into a small private foyer, a feature of the building's design that provided additional security and privacy for residents. Diane used a key card to unlock the door to Unit 2214, then stepped aside to allow me to enter first. I crossed the threshold and immediately stopped, momentarily stunned by what I saw. The condominium was breathtaking, not because of ostentatious luxury or showy design, but because of its perfect balance of elegance and comfort. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a panoramic view of Boston Harbor, filling the space with natural light. The open-concept living and dining area featured warm hardwood floors, custom built-in bookshelves, and furnishings that managed to be both sophisticated and inviting. As you can see, Mr. Jenkins had excellent taste, Diane commented, misinterpreting my silence as uncertainty. The furnishings are included in the property transfer, but of course you're free to make changes once you take ownership. It's perfect, I said softly, moving further into the space. I wouldn't change a thing. We continued the tour, exploring the chef's kitchen with its high-end appliances and marble countertops, the spacious main bedroom with its luxurious ensuite bathroom, the second bedroom currently configured as a home office with more built-in bookshelves and a comfortable reading nook by the window. Throughout, the decor reflected refined taste without ostentation, quality furnishings chosen for comfort as well as aesthetics, artwork that was interesting rather than merely expensive, touches like cashmere throws and well-worn leather-bound books that suggested a home rather than a showplace. The building amenities include a 24-hour concierge, valet parking, a fitness center, and a residence lounge, Diane continued, leading me back to the main living area. Monthly fees cover all common area maintenance, security, and basic utilities. Mr. Jenkins also contracted for additional housekeeping services twice weekly, which you could continue or discontinue as you prefer. I nodded, still somewhat overwhelmed by it all. And the parking? I don't currently have a vehicle, but I might in the future. The unit includes one dedicated parking space in the garage. Additional spaces can be rented if needed. She handed me a folder containing information about the building services, fee structures, and community guidelines. Do you have any other questions I can answer? I had dozens, of course, but most would need to wait until I had time to review the materials and consider my new circumstances more thoroughly. Not at the moment, thank you. You've been very helpful. If you decide you'd like to move in before the official deed transfer is complete, that can likely be arranged, Diane added as we prepared to leave. Since the unit is unoccupied and the estate is covering the fees, it would simply require authorization from the executor, which I understand is Mr. Jenkins' law firm. This was welcome news. The prospect of remaining in Jason's cramped apartment for another month had become increasingly unappealing now that I had seen my future home. I'll definitely look into that possibility. Thank you again for your assistance. After leaving Harbor Towers, I found a small cafe nearby where I could sit and collect my thoughts. Over a cup of tea and a scone I didn't really taste, I reviewed the building information and contemplated the swift reversal of my fortunes. Just weeks ago, I had been facing homelessness, dependent on reluctant family charity. Now I was preparing to move into a luxury condominium with financial security stretching far into whatever future remained for me. The irony wasn't lost on me. If Harry Jenkins had made his feelings known while we were both still vital and active, perhaps we might have forged a meaningful connection in our later years. Instead, his silent devotion had culminated in this posthumous gift, a gesture both deeply generous and tinged with the melancholy of missed opportunities. That evening, back in Jason's apartment, I contacted Lawrence Abernathy about the possibility of early occupancy. He was receptive to the idea, promising to speak with the executor and the property management company to make the necessary arrangements. I don't foresee any problems, he assured me. The estate continues to pay all fees until the transfer is complete, so there's no financial concern. And since you're the sole beneficiary of the property, it's really just a matter of paperwork and timing. 2 days later, I received confirmation that I could move into the Harbor Towers unit the following week, with a formal lease agreement covering the period until the deed transfer was finalized. The news accelerated my planning process. I would need to pack my limited belongings, arrange transportation, notify my family of the changed timeline, and begin addressing the practicalities of my new situation, changing my address with social security and other institutions, arranging for services, familiarizing myself with the neighborhood. Jason was visibly relieved when I informed him of the expedited move. That's great, Gran. Do you need help with anything? Packing or whatever? I don't have much to pack, I reminded him gently. But yes, if you could help transport my things on moving day, that would be appreciated. Perhaps Emma could assist as well. He nodded, already reaching for his phone. I'll text her now. We'll make sure you're all set up properly in the new place. The day of the move dawned with unexpected, emotional complexity. While eager to claim my new home and the independence it represented, I found myself experiencing a strange melancholy as I packed the few possessions that had accompanied me to Jason's apartment. These items, clothes, books, photographs, the small shepherdess figurine and other mementos I'd insisted on keeping, were the distilled essence of my longer life, survivors of multiple downsizings and transitions. They seemed simultaneously precious and pathetically inadequate as I prepared to install them in a spacious luxury condominium. Jason and Emma arrived promptly at 10, both clearly motivated to complete the move efficiently. Emma brought coffee and pastries, a thoughtful gesture that momentarily eased the underlying tension. "So, Harbor Towers," she commented as we ate. "That's pretty upscale, Gran. You're going to be living better than any of us." "It's certainly more luxurious than I ever expected at this stage of life," I acknowledged. "Though I'd trade some of the amenities for having remained in my own home all along." A brief silence followed my comment. Both grandchildren had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, remembering perhaps how quickly they had shuttled me from independent homeowner to dependent elder once my financial situation deteriorated. "Well, this is a fresh start," Jason said finally, changing the subject. "And the location is amazing. You'll be right near the aquarium, Faneuil Hall, all the good restaurants." "Yes, it's very centrally located," I agreed, allowing the conversation to move into safer territory. The actual process of moving was surprisingly quick. Everything I owned now fit easily into Jason's car with room to spare. Emma insisted on coming along to help me settle in, while Jason, after delivering my belongings to Harbor Towers, made his excuses and departed, eager, no doubt, to reclaim his apartment and his normal life. The Harbor Towers concierge greeted us warmly, providing temporary key cards and explaining building access procedures. A staff member helped carry my luggage to the elevator, and minutes later, Emma and I were standing in the foyer of what was now my home. "Oh my God, Gran," Emma breathed as she entered the condominium proper and took in the spectacular harbor view. This is incredible. You didn't say it was this nice." "It exceeded my expectations as well," I admitted, moving to stand beside her at the windows. Harry had excellent taste. We spent the next few hours unpacking my limited belongings and exploring the apartment more thoroughly. Emma was particularly impressed by the gourmet kitchen. "This is better equipped than most restaurants," she marveled, examining the professional-grade range and extensive collection of cookware. "Did you say this Jenkins guy liked to cook?" "I honestly didn't know him well enough to say," I replied, opening cabinets to discover a well-stocked pantry of non-perishable items, though the evidence suggests he at least appreciated culinary matters. As we continued our exploration, I found myself learning about Harry through his possessions and choices. The bookshelf in the living room revealed a man with eclectic tastes, literary classics alongside modern novels, historical biographies next to books on architecture and design, poetry collections suggesting a romantic sensibility I would never have associated with the reserved banker I vaguely remembered. The home office provided further insights. A collection of framed black and white photographs depicted scenes from around the world: the Eiffel Tower, Machu Picchu, the Great Wall of China, the canals of Venice. Had these been from his own travels, or aspirational images of places he hoped to visit? A leather-bound journal on the desk caught my attention, but I resisted the urge to open it, feeling it would somehow violate the privacy of a man who had already revealed more of himself than he ever had in life. "Have you looked in here yet?" Emma called from down the hallway. I followed her voice to a small room off the main hallway that I hadn't noticed during my initial tour with Diane. It appeared to be a combination of storage space and hobby area, with built-in cabinets and a workbench along one wall. "I didn't realize this was here," I admitted, taking in the unexpected space. Emma was examining a set of drawers beneath the workbench. There's some really interesting stuff in these. Look. She opened a drawer to reveal a collection of antique pocket watches, each nestled in its own velvet-lined compartment. Another drawer contained what appeared to be old coins carefully preserved in protective sleeves. Harry was a collector, it seems, I observed, both fascinated and slightly uncomfortable at this posthumous glimpse into the private passions of a man who had apparently harbored feelings for me for decades. There's something else here. Emma had moved to one of the upper cabinets and was carefully removing a rectangular object wrapped in archival tissue. Unwrapping it revealed a framed photograph I recognized immediately, the Northeastern Regional Bank Christmas party, circa 1980. Mark stood in the center of a group of colleagues, his arm around my waist, all of us wearing festive attire and smiling for the camera. I was indeed wearing a green dress, just as Harry had mentioned in his letter. "Is that you and Grandpa?" Emma asked, studying the image. "Yes, at a bank Christmas party many years ago." I took the frame from her, examining the familiar faces captured in that long-ago moment. Harry was there too, standing slightly apart from the main group, tall and somewhat awkward in his formal suit, looking not at the camera but at me. The realization sent a small shiver through me. Even then, his feelings had been evident, had someone been observant enough to notice. "He kept this all these years," I murmured, more to myself than to Emma. "Who did? Mr. Jenkins?" Emma looked puzzled. "Did you know him well?" I hadn't shared the contents of Harry's letter with anyone, keeping that unexpected revelation private. Now, looking at the carefully preserved photograph, I felt a need to acknowledge the truth, at least partially. "Not really," I said carefully. "He worked with your grandfather many years ago. They were friendly colleagues, nothing more, but apparently Harry never forgot that connection." Emma nodded, accepting this simplified explanation. We continued exploring the condominium, discovering small treasures and curious details that gradually constructed a more complete picture of Harry Jenkins. His tastes, his habits, the life he had built for himself in this beautiful space overlooking the harbor. By late afternoon, my meager possessions had been integrated into the much more extensive household Harry had left behind. Emma departed with promises to visit again soon, leaving me alone in my new home, a space filled with the belongings of a man I barely knew but who had known me, or at least an idealized version of me for most of his adult life. That evening, I stood at the windows watching darkness fall over Boston Harbor, lights from boats and the city creating a glittering display across the water. The view was spectacular, worth every penny of the property's substantial value. But more valuable still was what this inheritance represented. Not just financial security, but reclaimed independence and dignity after the humiliation of dependence. I thought of my family, Daniel and Meredith in Singapore, focused on their new adventure. Jason, already reclaiming his apartment and returning to his unencumbered bachelor existence. Emma, the most genuinely caring of the bunch, but still with the self-absorption of youth and ambition. They had done what they felt was necessary when my circumstances deteriorated, offering solutions that prioritized their convenience while ostensibly addressing my needs. They hadn't been cruel, merely pragmatic in a way that revealed the limits of their commitment to my welfare. And now, through Harry Jenkins' posthumous generosity, I had been liberated from dependence on their limited charity. The irony was profound. A man I barely remembered, who had loved me from afar without expectation or acknowledgement, had ultimately provided what my own flesh and blood had offered only reluctantly and conditionally. Over the following week, I settled into my new home and began establishing routines that accommodated both my needs and the opportunities presented by my changed circumstances. The Harbor Tower's concierge staff proved invaluable, helping me arrange for grocery delivery, recommending local services, and generally ensuring my comfort as I adjusted to my new environment. The financial aspect of my inheritance was also progressing smoothly. Lawrence Abernathy called to inform me that the cash portion had been transferred to an account established in my name at a reputable investment firm, with a meeting scheduled to discuss long-term management strategy. The deed transfer for the condominium was proceeding on schedule, with completion expected within the original 30-day timeline. "There is one additional matter I should mention," Mr. Abernathy added toward the end of our conversation. Mr. Jenkins maintained a safe deposit box at Boston Federal Bank. The key was among his personal effects, and access rights are being transferred to you as part of the estate. Once the paperwork is complete, you'll be able to examine the contents. This news added another layer to the unfolding story of my unexpected inheritance. What might Harry have considered valuable enough to secure in a safe deposit box? Family heirlooms? Important documents? Given what I now knew about his feelings, I couldn't help wondering if the contents might include additional personal revelations. "When do you expect the access transfer to be completed?" I asked. "Within the next 2 weeks, approximately the same timeline as the property deed. I'll notify you as soon as it's finalized." After ending the call, I wandered through the condominium, still adjusting to the reality that this beautiful space was now my home. In the week since moving in, I had begun to feel more comfortable among Harry's possessions, less like an intruder in someone else's life. I had even started using the chef's kitchen, discovering a previously untapped enjoyment in cooking with high-quality equipment and ingredients. The home office had become a particular favorite retreat. The comfortable reading chair positioned to capture both natural light and harbor views provided a perfect spot for enjoying the extensive library Harry had accumulated. I was currently making my way through a collection of classic British mysteries I'd found on one of the shelves, appreciating both the stories themselves and the evidence that Harry and I might have shared similar literary tastes. The financial security provided by the inheritance allowed me to consider possibilities I hadn't entertained since before Mark's death. I could travel if I wished, pursue hobbies or interests I'd set aside during leaner times, perhaps even contribute to causes I valued. The horizon of my remaining years had suddenly expanded from mere survival to potential flourishing. It was during this period of adjustment and recalibration that I received an unexpected call from Daniel. Since my move to Harbor Towers, communication with my family had been minimal, brief text messages confirming I was settling in, an occasional email from Emma sharing some aspect of her graduate studies. I had interpreted this restraint as a natural consequence of their relief at being freed from responsibility for my welfare. "Mom, how are you?" Daniel's voice carried clearly from Singapore, technology erasing the physical distance between us. "Settling into the new place, okay?" "Very well, thank you," I replied. "It's a beautiful home, and the building staff have been extremely helpful." "That's great to hear. Listen, Meredith and I have been talking, and we feel terrible about how everything happened with your housing situation. We were so caught up in the Singapore move that we didn't handle things as well as we should have." The apology was unexpected, prompting me to sit down at the kitchen island. "You did what you could under the circumstances," I said cautiously, unsure where this conversation was leading. "No, we didn't." Daniel's voice held a note of genuine regret I hadn't anticipated. "We should have found a better solution than Jason's apartment. We should have been more involved in helping you through the foreclosure. We got so focused on our own transition that we let you down." I was momentarily speechless, unprepared for this acknowledgement of what I had privately considered their abandonment. "Thank you for saying that," I managed finally. "It means a great deal to hear you recognize how difficult that period was." "We've been doing a lot of thinking since arriving here," Daniel continued. "The expatriate experience is illuminating, being outsiders, navigating unfamiliar systems, depending on others' goodwill. It's given us perspective on what you must have experienced, losing your home and independence so suddenly." Our conversation continued for nearly an hour, longer than any we'd had in recent memory. Daniel shared details of their adjustment to Singapore, the challenges and rewards of the new position, the children's adaptation to international schools, Meredith's exploration of volunteer opportunities within the expatriate community. Throughout, there was a reflective quality to his observations, suggesting genuine personal growth rather than mere politeness. "We'd love for you to visit when you're settled," he said, as our call drew to a close. "The apartment has a guest room specifically for family. Singapore is fascinating, and I think you'd enjoy experiencing it." "I'd like that," I replied, genuinely touched by the invitation. "Perhaps after the new year, when you're fully established. There." After ending the call, I sat for a long while, processing this unexpected outreach from my son. Had the distance, both physical and emotional, created space for reflection? Had my sudden financial independence shifted the dynamics of our relationship, removing the strain of obligation and allowing genuine connection to re-emerge? Whatever the explanation, I felt cautiously optimistic about the possibility of reconciliation, not just with Daniel, but perhaps with my grandchildren as well. The following day brought a similarly surprising communication, an email from Jason, apologizing for his abruptness during my stay at his apartment and inviting me to dinner at a restaurant near Harbor Towers. "I'd like to see your new place too, if that's okay," he wrote. "Maybe get to know the real Jason and Catherine, not just grandson and burden." The phrasing was startlingly direct, acknowledging what had gone unspoken during those difficult weeks of cohabitation. I appreciated his honesty and the initiative he was taking to repair our relationship. I responded immediately, accepting the dinner invitation and suggesting he visit the condominium beforehand. Emma, too, seemed to be recalibrating our relationship in light of my changed circumstances. She began calling more frequently, not with the dutiful check-ins of previous months, but with genuine conversations about her studies, her social life, her aspirations beyond graduation. During one such call, she mentioned a paper she was writing on intergenerational relationships and asked if she might interview me about my experiences. "Not for the paper directly," she clarified quickly. "Just to help me think about the real-world implications of what I'm researching. Your perspective would be really valuable." We arranged to meet for coffee the following week, an appointment I found myself genuinely anticipating rather than merely accommodating. The thought that Emma might see me as a source of wisdom rather than a problem to be managed represented a significant shift in our dynamic. As these family relationships began tentatively rebalancing, I received notification from Lawrence Abernathy that the safe deposit box access had been finalized. "You can visit the bank at your convenience," he informed me. "They have all the necessary documentation on file." The timing seemed fortuitous, a window into Harry Jenkins' private thoughts, just as I was reassessing my own family connections. I arranged to visit Boston Federal Bank the next morning, curious about what additional revelations might await. The bank's safe deposit vault was located in the basement level, a secure area accessed through a series of verification procedures. The attending clerk was professional and efficient, checking my identification, confirming my authorization, and escorting me to a private viewing room after retrieving Harry's box. "Take as much time as you need, Mrs. Martin," she said, placing the substantial metal container on the table before me. "Ring the bell when you're finished, and I'll escort you back to the main floor." Alone with Harry's secured possessions, I felt a momentary hesitation. Whatever lay within this box, he had considered it valuable enough to protect with the highest level of security available to private citizens. Was I prepared for what I might discover? Taking a deep breath, I inserted the key and lifted the lid. The contents were surprisingly minimal, a sealed envelope with my name written on it in the same shaky handwriting as the previous letter. A small velvet box of the type typically used for jewelry, and a manila folder containing what appeared to be legal documents. I began with the envelope, carefully breaking the seal to reveal several handwritten pages. "My dear Catherine, if you're reading this, then you've accepted my posthumous gift and are now settled in Harbor Towers. I hope the place brings you as much comfort and pleasure as it brought me during my years there. This second letter addresses matters I felt were too complex or delicate for my initial explanation. Please understand that everything I share comes from a place of deep respect for you, for Mark, and for the sanctity of the life you built together. My feelings for you began innocently enough: admiration for a vibrant, intelligent woman who brought light into every room she entered. Over time, that admiration deepened into something more profound, though I never acted upon it or allowed it to intrude upon your marriage. I maintained appropriate boundaries, limiting our interactions to social gatherings where others were present, never seeking opportunities to be alone with you or to create inappropriate intimacy. What you may not know, what Mark and I agreed would remain between us, is that my financial success stemmed directly from his intervention during a period of personal crisis. In 1992, I made a series of catastrophic investment decisions that nearly bankrupted me. Beyond the financial implications, these mistakes could have resulted in professional ruin had they become widely known within banking circles. Mark discovered the situation while reviewing some interdepartmental transactions. Rather than reporting my errors, which would have been the technically correct action, he approached me privately. Over the course of several months, working evenings and weekends, he helped me unwind the problematic investments and reconstruct my portfolio on more solid foundations. I offered financial compensation for his assistance, which he firmly declined. "Consider it a favor between friends," he said. "Someday you may be in a position to help someone else in similar circumstances." That opportunity never materialized during my lifetime. Instead, I built upon the foundation Mark helped establish, eventually accumulating the wealth that now passes to you. In my mind, this inheritance is not charity or the indulgence of unrequited feelings, but the settling of a debt, returning to Mark's beloved wife what ultimately began with his generosity toward me. The accompanying documents provide details of my financial journey post-1992, should you wish to understand more fully the path from near ruin to prosperity. The jewelry box contains a small token, not a romantic gesture, but a symbol of the interconnectedness of our lives through Mark's pivotal kindness. I hope this additional context brings clarity and peace as you move forward in your new circumstances. Know that my greatest wish is for you to find joy and fulfillment in whatever time remains, freed from financial constraints and able to focus on what truly matters in life. With deepest respect and gratitude, Harry. I lowered the letter, profoundly moved by this additional context. Harry's inheritance was not merely the romantic gesture of a man who had harbored unrequited feelings, but a completion of a circle of kindness that had begun with Mark's compassionate intervention decades earlier. The knowledge transformed my understanding of the bequest, adding layers of meaning beyond the material benefits. Next, I opened the velvet box, discovering a simple but elegant pin in the shape of a compass rose, crafted in white gold with a small sapphire at its center. No romantic token indeed, but rather a symbol of direction and guidance, perhaps acknowledging Mark's role in redirecting Harry's life toward safer harbors. I pinned it to my lapel, appreciating both its aesthetic appeal and its symbolic significance. The manila folder contained exactly what Harry had described: financial statements, investment records, and portfolio analyses documenting his journey from near bankruptcy to substantial wealth. The earliest documents showed alarming negative balances and precarious leveraging, gradually transitioning to increasingly stable and eventually prosperous positions. It was a meticulous record of financial recovery and growth, testament to both Mark's intervention and Harry's subsequent prudent management. As I returned these materials to the safe deposit box, retaining only the letter and pin, I felt a sense of completion. The mysteries surrounding my unexpected inheritance had been largely resolved, the narrative now coherent and meaningful. Harry Jenkins had not been a secret admirer making a grand posthumous gesture, but a man honoring a debt of gratitude through the most significant means available to him. The knowledge brought peace, removing any lingering discomfort about accepting such generosity from someone I barely knew. This was not charity or manipulation, but the fulfillment of an obligation Harry had carried for decades. An obligation not to me directly, but to the memory of my husband's kindness during a moment of crisis. Over the following weeks, I settled more comfortably into my new life at Harbor Towers. The condominium truly began to feel like home as I gradually incorporated more of my own touches, rearranging some furniture to better suit my preferences, adding fresh flowers to the living room each week, establishing small rituals that made the space mine despite its origins in another's life. My relationships with family members continued their cautious improvement. The dinner with Jason proved surprisingly enjoyable, revealing a young man more thoughtful and substantive than the harried, reluctant host I'd known during my stay at his apartment. Emma's interview about intergenerational relationships evolved into a regular weekly coffee date, opportunities for genuine connection beyond the obligations of family duty. Even Daniel and Meredith maintained more consistent contact from Singapore, with video calls that included their children and conversations that felt increasingly authentic rather than performative. As Christmas approached, my first in the new home, I decided to host a small gathering before Daniel's family departed for a holiday vacation in Bali. The spacious condominium easily accommodated Jason, Emma, Daniel, and family during their brief stopover in Boston, along with Eleanor and a few other friends I'd reconnected with since moving downtown. "This place is amazing, Mom," Daniel commented as he helped me arrange a charcuterie board in the kitchen. "You seem really at home here already." "It's becoming more comfortable each day," I acknowledged, though I still occasionally open a drawer and am surprised by its contents, discovering Harry's life in small increments. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "It's an unusual situation, inheriting not just someone's possessions but essentially their entire personal space, intact. Like stepping into someone else's life midstream." "That's an apt description," I agreed. "Though increasingly it's becoming my life, shaped around what was his, but gradually transforming into something new." In the living room, Emma was showing her younger cousins the spectacular harbor view, while Jason chatted with Meredith about investment strategies, his professional expertise finally finding an appreciative audience. The scene was comfortable, natural, lacking the underlying tension that had characterized family gatherings in recent years. As I arranged glasses on a tray for the mulled wine warming on the stove, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. A woman transformed not just by financial circumstances, but by the reclamation of dignity and agency that Harry's inheritance had provided. The compass rose pin glinted on my sweater, a small but meaningful acknowledgement of the unexpected journey that had brought me to this moment. Financial security had not magically solved every challenge of aging, of course. I still faced the physical limitations and health concerns that accumulate with advancing years. But the restoration of independence, the ability to make choices based on preference rather than desperate necessity, had profoundly altered my experience of this life stage. I was no longer an inconvenient elder to be managed and accommodated, but a woman of means making her own decisions and determining her own path forward. The transformation extended to my family relationships as, well, freed from the burden of reluctant obligation, my son and grandchildren could relate to me as a person rather than a problem. Our interactions had gradually shifted from dutiful to genuine, revealing the potential for deeper connections now that financial dependency no longer colored every exchange. As I carried the tray of steaming mulled wine into the living room, where my family and friends were gathered in easy conversation before the backdrop of Boston Harbor at twilight, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for Harry Jenkins' generosity, but for the second chance it represented. A chance to age with dignity, to maintain meaningful connections, to continue contributing to the lives of those I loved without becoming a burden they resented. "A toast," I said, raising my glass once everyone had been served. to unexpected, blessings and new beginnings. To new beginnings, they echoed, glasses lifting in unison, and to Harry Jenkins, I added silently, acknowledging the man whose unrevealed devotion and posthumous generosity had transformed the final chapter of my life, from one of dependency and diminishment to one of dignity, security, and reclaimed joy. Wherever his spirit might be, I hoped he could somehow know the profound difference his final gesture had made, not just materially, but in restoring connections that might otherwise have been permanently damaged by the harsh realities of aging in a society ill-equipped to value its elders. The compass rose pin caught the light as I lowered my glass, reminding me that life's journey often takes unexpected turns. My grandchildren had indeed kicked me out when financial disaster struck, or at least relegated me to the margins of their lives, accommodated but not embraced. But Harry Jenkins's bequest had not merely provided material rescue. It had created space for healing and reconciliation that might never have been possible otherwise. As the evening progressed, filled with laughter, conversation, and the warm glow of connection restored, I silently acknowledged the complex truth at the heart of my transformed circumstances. Sometimes the greatest gifts come from unexpected sources, and sometimes what appears to be an ending is merely a prelude to a new and unanticipated beginning. My grandchildren had kicked me out when I lost my pension, but they didn't know I had just inherited a fortune from a man who had loved me from afar for 40 years. A man whose silent devotion had ultimately provided not just financial security, but the precious gift of reclaimed dignity and the opportunity for genuine reconciliation with the family I loved. In the soft December twilight, watching the lights of boats moving across the harbor beyond my windows, surrounded by the family that was cautiously finding its way back to authentic connection, I silently thanked Harry Jenkins for the most meaningful inheritance of all. Not the wealth or the beautiful condominium, but the chance to write a different ending to my story than the one that had seemed inevitable just months before. It was a story still unfolding, with chapters yet to be written. But now, instead of a narrative of decline and dependency, it had become one of unexpected renewal, a testament to the power of generosity to transform not just individual lives, but the connections between them, creating space for healing where there had been only hurt, and opening possibilities where there had seemed only painful limitations. The compass rose pin gleamed in the lamplight, a reminder that even when the path ahead seems clear and fixed, life retains its capacity to surprise, sometimes through loss and challenge, but occasionally, miraculously, through unlooked-for blessings that arrive precisely when most needed, guiding us toward previously unimagined horizons. Months passed, and with each one, my life at Harbor Towers became more established and fulfilling. I discovered unexpected pleasures in urban living after decades in suburban settings. The convenience of having cultural attractions within walking distance, the vibrant energy of downtown Boston, the diversity of people encountered in daily routines. The building's amenities provided both security and community, with regular social events in the residents' lounge, offering opportunities to form new friendships among neighbors. My family relationships continued their gradual healing process. Jason, now more comfortable in his role as attentive grandson rather than reluctant host, developed a habit of joining me for dinner every other week, often bringing interesting wines he thought I might enjoy. Emma included me in some of her graduate school activities, inviting me to attend lectures and panel discussions related to aging and intergenerational dynamics. And Daniel and Meredith maintained regular contact from Singapore, their video calls, evolving from dutiful check-ins to genuine sharing of experiences and concerns. The financial aspects of Harry's inheritance proved even more substantial than initially apparent. The investment portfolio Lawrence Abernathy transferred to my name included not just stocks and bonds, but also shares in several successful tech startups, one of which announced an initial public offering that significantly increased the value of my holdings. Working with a financial advisor recommended by the law firm, I established a comprehensive plan for managing the inheritance, maintaining sufficient liquid assets for current needs while investing the remainder for long-term stability and potential growth. This financial security allowed me to explore philanthropic interests I'd previously been unable to pursue. After careful consideration, I established a small foundation focused on supporting older adults facing housing insecurity, a cause that resonated deeply given my own recent experience. The Catherine Martin Housing Security Fund worked with local agencies to provide emergency assistance, legal advice, and advocacy for seniors at risk of losing their homes through foreclosure, predatory lending, or other financial crises. "It's a perfect focus for your foundation," Emma remarked when I shared my plans. She had become increasingly interested in my charitable efforts, even offering to serve on the advisory board once she completed her graduate studies. "Using your experience to help others in similar situations creates meaning from what you went through." She was right, of course. The foundation work provided not just purpose, but a sense of justice, transforming my personal hardship into a force for positive change in others' lives. Each elderly person or couple who maintained housing stability through the fund's intervention represented a small victory against the systemic challenges facing seniors in an economy increasingly hostile to those on fixed incomes. As spring blossomed across Boston, bringing a riot of tulips to the public garden and sailboats back to the harbor, I received an unexpected email from Daniel. His firm was sending him back to Boston for a 2-week consulting project in May, and he wondered if he might stay at Harbor Towers rather than a hotel. "It would give us some real time together," he wrote. "Something we haven't had in far too long. Plus, it would save the firm a substantial amount on accommodations, which might make them more amenable to similar projects in the future, creating more opportunities for visits home." I responded immediately, expressing delight at the prospect of an extended visit. The condominium's second bedroom, which I had gradually transformed from Harry's office into a proper guest room, would be perfect for Daniel's stay. We made arrangements for his arrival, and I found myself looking forward to this opportunity for prolonged connection with my son, away from the distractions of his immediate family and the time constraints of typical visits. Daniel arrived on a sunny Tuesday, looking both jet-lagged and pleased as he dropped his luggage in the foyer and embraced me warmly. "This view never gets old," he commented, moving to the windows to take in the harbor panorama. "You really lucked out with this place, Mom." "I did indeed," I agreed, joining him at the window. "Though I've come to believe it was more than luck. Have I ever told you about Mark's connection to Harry Jenkins?" Over cups of tea, I shared the full story of Harry's inheritance, including the contents of both letters and the revelation about Mark's assistance during Harry's financial crisis. Daniel listened with growing amazement, occasionally asking questions but mostly absorbing. This expanded narrative of his father's impact on a colleague's life and the eventual ripple effects back to our family. "Dad never mentioned any of this," he said when I finished. "Not the helping Jenkins recover from bad investments, not the ongoing connection, nothing." "It doesn't surprise me," I replied. "Your father was never one to broadcast his good deeds, and he respected confidentiality absolutely, especially in financial matters." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "It's strange to think about how Dad's actions all those years ago ultimately created the security you have now, like some kind of karmic circle completing itself." "That's exactly how I've come to see it," I agreed. "Not as charity from Harry, but as the completion of a cycle of kindness that began with your father's compassion decades ago." This framing seemed to resonate with Daniel, perhaps allowing him to reconcile any lingering discomfort about my financial rescue coming from outside the family rather than from his own resources. The knowledge that his father had played a pivotal role in the chain of events leading to my current stability appeared to ease something in him, a tension I hadn't fully recognized until I saw it release. During the following 2 weeks, Daniel and I established new patterns of connection. He worked during business hours, of course, but evenings and weekends provided ample opportunity for shared meals, walks along the harbor, visits to museums and restaurants I'd discovered since moving downtown. We talked more openly than we had in years, discussing not just surface events but deeper matters, his ambitions and concerns about the Singapore position, my adjustment to widowhood and aging, our evolving understanding of family obligations across generations. "I've been thinking a lot about how we handled things when you lost the house," Daniel said during one of these conversations, as we shared a bottle of wine on my balcony overlooking the illuminated nighttime harbor. "We really dropped the ball, didn't we?" "You were dealing with a major life transition yourself," I reminded him, not wanting to deepen any guilt he might be feeling. "The Singapore opportunity required your full attention." "That's an explanation, not an excuse," he replied, showing a level of self-awareness that both surprised and pleased me. "The truth is, I, took the path of least resistance. Jason's apartment wasn't a good solution for you, but it was convenient for us. We prioritized our needs over yours, justifying it as pragmatism." The directness of his acknowledgement was unexpected and deeply healing. "Yes," I agreed simply, "though I understand the pressures you were under." "Understanding someone's constraints doesn't mean accepting poor treatment," Daniel said, echoing what could have been one of my own motherly admonitions from his childhood. "I've realized something important living in Singapore: how deeply Western cultures have lost the tradition of caring properly for elders. In Asia, I see families making significant sacrifices to keep parents and grandparents integrated in family life, valued and respected rather than considered burdens. This cultural observation led to a lengthy discussion about aging in America, the systemic failures, the individual choices, the economic realities that made elder care increasingly challenging. It was the kind of substantive conversation I had missed having with my son, reminiscent of the intellectual exchanges we'd enjoyed when he was younger, before adult responsibilities and geographic distance had narrowed our interactions to practical matters and superficial updates. As Daniel's visit drew to a close, he raised a possibility I hadn't considered. "What would you think about spending Christmas in Singapore? The apartment has plenty of room, and the grandkids would love having you there for an extended stay. Singapore goes all out for holiday decorations, and the international community organizes some wonderful celebrations." The invitation was genuine and appealing, far different from the dutiful proposals of my previous visits to his family, which had always carried an unspoken time limit and awareness of my status as guest, rather than integral family member. "I'd love that," I said sincerely. "Assuming my health cooperates, of course." At 78, long-distance travel required more consideration than it once had, though my general condition remained relatively good for my age. "We'll make it as comfortable as possible," Daniel assured me. "Business class flights? Plenty. Of rest built into the schedule, medical facilities identified in advance just in case." His thoughtfulness about potential challenges rather than expectation of accommodation to family convenience represented a significant shift in perspective. One, I attributed partly to his expatriate experience, and partly to our recent honest conversations about family obligations across generations. After Daniel's departure, I continued developing my new life's routines and connections. The foundation work expanded, with a small staff now helping manage the growing number of cases we supported. My social circle widened through both building activities and community engagement, providing a network of friendships that enhanced daily life. I even began dating casually, nothing serious, but enjoyable companionship with a retired professor who shared my interest in classical music and art films. Emma completed her graduate studies that summer, earning her PhD in psychology with a specialization in gerontology. I attended her graduation ceremony with immense pride, watching as she accepted her diploma and hood with the poise and confidence of a young woman fully coming into her professional identity. "I couldn't have done it without your insights, Gran," she told me at the celebration afterward. Our conversations about your experiences really informed my research and gave it depth beyond what I found in the literature. I'm glad my adventures in aging could be useful, I replied with a smile. Though I suspect your academic success had more to do with your intelligence and dedication than my anecdotal contributions. Emma's first professional position kept her in Boston, a research role at a prestigious medical center studying cognitive health in older adults. She visited regularly, sometimes bringing colleagues who were interested in my perspective as both a subject matter contributor and the founder of a foundation working in adjacent spaces. These interactions were intellectually stimulating and personally gratifying, repositioning me from dependent grandmother to respected elder with valuable experience and insights. As autumn returned to New England, bringing spectacular foliage to the city parks and a crisp edge to the harbor breezes, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary transformation of the past year. From the devastation of foreclosure and family displacement to financial security and restored relationships, the journey had been both painful and ultimately redemptive. I stood at the windows of the condominium that had become genuinely mine, watching sailboats tacking across the harbor in the golden afternoon light. The compass rose pin Harry had left me secured to the lapel of my sweater. The weight of gratitude I felt was almost physical, for Harry's generosity, for my family's gradual but sincere reconciliation, for the privilege of this final chapter unfolding with dignity and purpose rather than dependency and diminishment. The truth underneath it all was both simple and profound. My grandchildren had indeed kicked me out when I lost my pension, but they didn't know I had just inherited a fortune from a man whose quiet devotion had ultimately provided not just material rescue but the opportunity for all of us to rediscover what family could and should mean beyond mere obligation. Some might see poetic justice in how my circumstances had reversed, the formerly dependent elder now financially secure, while family members who had treated me as a burden found themselves in the position of reconnecting on my terms rather than theirs. But I preferred to focus on the healing rather than any sense of vindication, appreciating how financial independence had created space for genuine reconciliation that might never have been possible otherwise. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the harbor waters in shades of amber and rose, I silently thanked Harry Jenkins for his extraordinary gift, not just the material provisions that had transformed my immediate circumstances, but the more profound blessing of a reclaimed future I could shape according to my own values and priorities for whatever time remained. The pier lights began illuminating one by one along the waterfront, their reflections shimmering on the darkening water. Night was coming, as it inevitably does, but unlike a year ago, when darkness had seemed to be closing in on all sides of my life, this approaching evening brought peace rather than dread. The comfortable knowledge that tomorrow would dawn with purpose, connection, and the quiet joy of a life unexpectedly renewed. I touched the compass rose pin lightly with my fingertips, acknowledging once more the strange and winding path that had brought me to this moment. My grandchildren had kicked me out when I lost my pension, but they didn't know I had just inherited a fortune that would transform not just my circumstances, but our relationship, creating space for something better and truer to emerge from, what had nearly been lost entirely. Some endings are really beginnings in disguise. In the gathering twilight overlooking Boston Harbor, I embraced this truth with profound gratitude, ready for whatever the next chapter might bring. The gentle chime of the doorbell interrupted my reflections. Checking the security panel by the entryway, I saw Emma's familiar face on the small screen, her expression bright despite the evident fatigue of a long workday. "Come in, sweetheart," I called through the intercom, pressing the button to unlock the secure lobby entrance. Minutes later, she arrived at my door, a thick folder tucked under one arm and a bakery box in her free hand. "I come bearing dissertation defenses finally over. Celebratory pastries," she announced, holding up the box. "And a proposal I'd like to discuss with you." "That sounds intriguing," I replied, taking the bakery box as she entered. "Shall we have these with tea on the balcony? The evening is mild, For October. Emma followed me to the kitchen, setting her folder on the island counter as I prepared a tray with tea things and the promised pastries. Delicate French confections from a boutique bakery near her apartment. She seemed simultaneously excited and nervous, a combination that piqued my curiosity about whatever proposal she intended to present. Once settled on the balcony with steaming cups of Earl Grey and plates bearing flaky millefeuille pastries, Emma finally broached her subject. Gran, you know how my dissertation focused on narrative approaches to maintaining identity and purpose during major late-life transitions? I nodded, having served as both informal consultant and occasional research subject during her academic journey. You were examining how the stories people construct about their experiences shape their adaptation to change. I found it fascinating. Well, the committee did too. She smiled briefly before continuing. They've recommended I develop it into a book, something accessible to general readers, not just academics, and I'd like you to collaborate with me on it. The suggestion caught me by surprise. Me? I'm not an academic writer, Emma. Exactly, she replied eagerly. That's what would make this special. I have the theoretical framework and research methodology, but you have lived experience and a natural storytelling ability. Together, we could create something truly meaningful, weaving research findings with real narratives of resilience and adaptation. She opened the folder she'd brought, spreading several documents across the small table between us. I've outlined a concept that alternates chapters. My analysis of patterns and principles followed by your narrative illustrations drawing from your own journey and others' stories you've encountered through the Foundation. As I examined her materials, I was struck by both the thoughtfulness of the proposal and the symmetry it represented. Granddaughter and grandmother collaborating as equals, each bringing valuable but different perspectives to a shared project. It was the type of relationship I had scarcely dared hope for during those dark days in Jason's apartment, when family connections had seemed reduced to reluctant obligation rather than genuine engagement. This is extremely well considered, Emma, I said finally, looking up from the outline. I'm honored that you'd want my involvement, though I wonder if my single experience provides enough diversity for what you're envisioning. Your experience is just the starting point, she explained. Through the Foundation, you've connected with dozens of older adults navigating significant transitions, housing insecurity, financial setbacks, health challenges, loss of independence. With appropriate permissions, their stories could provide the rich tapestry we need to illustrate the theoretical concepts. The idea was appealing on multiple levels, an opportunity for meaningful work applying my life experience, a chance to deepen my relationship with Emma through creative collaboration, and potentially a way to amplify the Foundation's mission by bringing wider attention to the challenges facing older adults in our society. I'd need to be careful about confidentiality with the Foundation clients, I mused, considering potential ethical boundaries. But with proper protections and consent, I do think their experiences, and mine, could contribute valuable perspective. Emma's face lit up. So you'll do it? You'll collaborate with me? I'm certainly interested, I confirmed, her enthusiasm infectious. Let's develop the concept further and establish a realistic timeline. Your new position must demand significant attention, and I have Foundation responsibilities to balance as well. I've thought about that too, she said, pulling another document from her folder. Here's a proposed working schedule that respects both our existing commitments while making steady progress. We could meet weekly, alternating between your place and mine, with specific goals for each session. As we discussed logistics and creative approach, I marveled at the woman Emma had become, thoughtful, organized, passionate about meaningful work, and now treating me as a valuable collaborator rather than an elderly relative to be managed. The transformation in our relationship mirrored my own journey from dependency to renewed purpose, both made possible by the unexpected intervention of Harry Jenkins's bequest. Later that evening, after Emma had departed with our newly refined project plan, I found myself drawn once more to the windows overlooking the harbor. Lights from boats and buildings shimmered on the dark water, creating floating constellations that shifted with the gentle harbor swells. The compass rose pin, which had become something of a talisman, caught the ambient light as I absently touched it, reflecting on the day's developments. A book collaboration with my granddaughter. A foundation helping others navigate challenges similar to those I had faced. Financial security that enabled rather than constrained choices about how to spend my remaining years. Relationships with family members that were evolving toward authenticity rather than mere duty. All stemming from Harry Jenkins's extraordinary gift, itself flowing from Mark's long-ago kindness. The tapestry of interconnection seemed both miraculous and logical, threads weaving together across decades to create a pattern more beautiful and complex than any individual could have designed. Alone, I thought again of Harry's letter, his description of Mark's assistance as a favor between friends that might someday be passed forward. How astonished both men would be to see the far-reaching consequences of that initial compassionate act. Not just financial security for one elderly woman, but ripples of positive change extending to strangers through the Foundation's work, and now potentially to readers who might find wisdom and courage in the book Emma and I would create together. The collaboration with Emma progressed smoothly. Over the following months, our weekly work sessions becoming highlights that structured my increasingly full calendar. We developed a rhythm, alternating between theoretical discussions and practical storytelling, each of us challenging and enhancing the other's contributions. Emma brought academic rigor and contemporary perspective. I offered experiential wisdom and narrative technique. Together, we crafted something neither could have created independently, a work that married scholarly insight with authentic human experience. Your chapter on reframing loss as transition is particularly powerful, Emma commented during one session in early December, after reading my draft chronicling the emotional journey from homeowner to displaced elder to reinvented urban dweller. You've captured something essential about how meaning is constructed through narrative that perfectly illustrates the theoretical concepts in my section. Your framework gave me language for experiences I felt but couldn't articulate, I replied, genuinely appreciative of how her academic contributions had deepened my understanding of my own journey. That's what will make this book valuable, I think. The conversation between lived experience and structured analysis. Our collaboration extended beyond the book project to other aspects of our lives as well. Emma became increasingly involved with the Foundation, offering professional insights that strengthened our approaches to supporting vulnerable seniors. I, in turn, provided perspective on her research proposals and academic writing, offering feedback from the viewpoint of both subject and general reader. As Christmas approached, preparations for my Singapore trip occupied increasing attention. Daniel and Meredith sent detailed information about weather, cultural considerations, and family activities planned for my 3-week visit. Jason helped arrange for a house sitter, a trusted colleague from his firm who needed temporary accommodations while his own place underwent renovations. And Emma assisted with practical travel preparations, accompanying me shopping for appropriate lightweight clothing and helping organize medications and travel documents. "I wish I could join you in Singapore," she remarked as we sorted through potential outfits for various planned activities. "It sounds like they're planning quite a festive holiday." "Perhaps next time," I suggested. "Once our book is further along, maybe we could plan a working trip together, combine family visit with some writing retreats in interesting locations." Emma's eyes lit up at the idea. "I'd love that, Gran. Southeast Asia has fascinating approaches to aging and elder care that would add valuable perspective to our work." The casual way we now discussed future collaborations and shared adventures represented a profound shift from the strained interactions of the previous year. Financial independence had created space for genuine connection based on mutual interest rather than obligation, a transformation as valuable as the material security Harry's inheritance had provided. The Singapore journey itself proved both. challenging and deeply rewarding. The long-haul flight tested my physical stamina, but Daniel's thoughtful arrangements, business class accommodations, wheelchair assistance during connections, a full day of rest upon arrival, mitigated the worst effects of travel at my age. Daniel and Meredith's expatriate home was a revelation. A spacious apartment in a luxury high-rise with views of the city skyline and harbor that rivaled my own in Boston. The guest accommodations were comfortable and private, allowing me to retreat when needed while still being integrated into family activities. Most striking was the change in how they incorporated me into daily life, not as a burden to be managed, but as a valued elder whose presence enhanced their experience. The grandchildren, now several years older than during our last extended time together, showed genuine interest in my stories and perspectives, particularly fascinated by the dramatic reversals in my circumstances since they'd last spent significant time with me. So you went from almost homeless to living in one of Boston's most expensive buildings? 16-year-old Sophia, no longer the Sophie of childhood, marveled over breakfast one morning. That's like something from a movie, Grandma. Life often contains more surprising twists than fiction, I replied, sharing a knowing smile with Daniel across the table. Especially when you've lived as long as I have. Christmas itself was a blend of familiar traditions and new experiences, stockings and presents in the morning, followed by a festive hotel brunch featuring international holiday dishes from around the world. The afternoon brought a cruise around Singapore Harbor on a friend's yacht. The warm tropical air, a stark contrast to the New England winters I associated with the holiday season. Throughout the celebrations, I was conscious of being fully present rather than merely accommodated, offering genuine contributions to conversations, being consulted on decisions, participating actively rather than passively observing from the periphery. The difference from previous family gatherings was subtle but significant, a recalibration of relationships that acknowledged my continued value beyond mere familial connection. On Boxing Day, as the family relaxed in the afternoon following a morning of shopping at Singapore's famous Orchard Road, Daniel joined me on the apartment's balcony, where I was enjoying a quiet moment with a book. "This visit has been really special, Mom," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "Having you here, seeing you so engaged with everyone, it's how family should be." "It has been wonderful," I agreed. "Very different from our last extended time together." Daniel nodded, his expression turning reflective. "I've been thinking a lot about that period, when you lost the house and we were preparing for Singapore. We handled it badly." "We've discussed this before," I reminded him gently. "You were dealing with major life changes yourselves." "Yes, but that's not really the point." He leaned forward, his earnestness reminding me of the serious little boy he'd once been, determined to understand complex concepts beyond his years. "What I've come to realize, especially living here surrounded by different cultural approaches to family, is how quickly we abandoned our responsibility to you." The directness of his assessment was startling, though not inaccurate. "It was a difficult situation for everyone," I offered, still reluctant to deepen any guilt he might feel. "The difficulty isn't what matters," Daniel insisted. "It's how we respond to difficulty that reveals character. And frankly, our character as a family didn't show very well during that crisis." I remained silent, allowing him the space to continue this unexpected reflection. "Here in Singapore, I've watched colleagues make significant sacrifices to care for aging parents, adapting homes, adjusting career tracks, rearranging financial priorities," he continued. "Not grudgingly, but as a natural extension of family obligation. Meanwhile, I responded to your crisis by looking for the quickest, least disruptive solution for ourselves." "Cultural differences regarding elder care are significant," I acknowledged. "Western societies have largely institutionalized what other cultures still manage within family structures." "That's an explanation, not an excuse," Daniel replied, unconsciously echoing his words from our conversation in Boston months earlier. The truth is, Mom, if Harry Jenkins hadn't appeared like some kind of deus ex machina, you might still be living in unsuitable conditions, marginalized from family life, treated as a problem rather than a person. His unflinching assessment was both painful and healing, a recognition of difficult truths that created possibility for genuine reconciliation rather than superficial harmony. Perhaps, I conceded. But Harry did appear in his way, and that changed everything, not just financially, but in how it allowed all of us to relate to each other without the strain of dependency and obligation. Daniel nodded slowly. That's the saddest part, in a way. That it took financial independence for us to rediscover authentic family connection. It says something troubling about us, maybe about our whole society. Or perhaps it says something hopeful, I suggested. That despite initial missteps, we found our way back to meaningful relationship. Many families never manage that recovery, regardless of financial circumstances. We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the tropical sunset paint the Singapore skyline in vibrant oranges and pinks. So different from Boston's harbor views, yet similarly beautiful in its play of light on architecture and water. I'm glad we're having this holiday together, Daniel said finally. And I hope it's the first of many, not an isolated event. I'd like that very much, I replied, reaching over to squeeze his hand briefly. The remainder of my Singapore stay continued in this vein of genuine connection and mutual appreciation. Meredith and I spent an afternoon at the remarkable Gardens by the Bay, discussing her volunteer work with expatriate youth and my foundation activities. The grandchildren included me in outings to their favorite local spots, proudly showing off their knowledge of Singaporean culture and cuisine. Daniel arranged a special New Year's Eve celebration at a rooftop restaurant overlooking Marina Bay, where we watched spectacular fireworks while reflecting on the extraordinary year that had passed. Throughout these experiences, I was conscious of a profound shift from my position just 12 months earlier, from unwanted dependent to welcomed participant, from burden to contributor, from problem to person. The transformation reflected not just my changed financial circumstances, but a fundamental realignment of family dynamics made possible by the removal of financial obligation as the primary lens through which relationships were viewed. Returning to Boston in mid-January, I found Harbor Towers welcoming in its familiarity, my home now in more than just legal ownership. Jason's colleague had maintained the condominium beautifully during my absence, even caring for the small collection of houseplants I'd gradually accumulated. The harbor views greeted me like old friends, the winter light on the water creating a stark beauty different from but equally compelling as Singapore's tropical vistas. Emma welcomed me back with her customary enthusiasm, arriving the day after my return with a stack of notes for our book project and eager questions about my Asian experiences. We need to incorporate some cross-cultural perspective into the II. Later chapters, she declared after hearing my observations about family elder care in Singapore. The contrast highlights how much Western approaches to aging are socially constructed rather than inevitable. Our work resumed with renewed energy, my travel experiences adding depth to our exploration of how environment and cultural context shape late-life transitions. The manuscript was progressing well, with several academic publishers expressing preliminary interest based on Emma's professional reputation and the unique intergenerational collaboration our project represented. February brought a significant milestone for the foundation, our first formal fundraising gala, held at a prestigious downtown hotel. Though Harry's inheritance had provided the initial funding, sustainable operation required broader financial support, particularly as our caseload increased and staff expanded to meet growing demand. The event exceeded expectations, attracting substantial donations from both individual philanthropists and corporate sponsors. More importantly, It raised awareness of elder housing insecurity issues among influential community members who could potentially impact policy decisions affecting vulnerable seniors. "Your personal testimony was the highlight of the evening," commented Eleanor, who had served on the foundation board since its inception. "Nothing communicates the urgency of our mission like hearing from someone who actually experienced what we're trying to prevent for others." Indeed, I had found that sharing my story, judiciously edited to focus on the housing crisis rather than the dramatic resolution, created powerful connections with both potential donors and clients seeking assistance. My journey from homeowner to near homelessness resonated with many older adults facing similar challenges, while the Foundation's work demonstrated that practical solutions existed when appropriate support systems were available. As winter gradually yielded to spring, another unexpected development emerged from my transformed circumstances. Lawrence Abernathy, the attorney who had handled Harry's estate, contacted me with an intriguing proposition. "Mrs. Martin, I'm reaching out in a somewhat unofficial capacity," he began during our phone conversation. "A situation has arisen that made me think of you and your foundation." "Oh, how can I help?" I asked, curious about this unusual contact months after all estate matters had been settled. "We have a client. I can't share specifics due to confidentiality, who is planning his estate. Like Mr. Jenkins, he has substantial assets and no direct heirs. He's interested in directing his wealth toward addressing elder housing insecurity, but wants confidence that his resources will be used effectively." I began to see where this was leading. "And you thought of the Catherine Martin Housing Security Fund?" "Exactly," Lawrence confirmed. "Having observed how thoughtfully you've managed your own unexpected inheritance, both personally and philanthropically, I took the liberty of mentioning your foundation as a potential recipient worthy of consideration." The conversation led to a meeting with Lawrence and his client, a retired surgeon in his 80s who had accumulated significant wealth through both his medical practice and astute investments. Dr. William Anderson, himself a widower without children, expressed deep concern about the growing crisis of elder housing insecurity, particularly among retired professionals who had seen savings and pensions eroded by economic downturns and healthcare costs. "I've watched colleagues, accomplished physicians and academics, reduced to desperate circumstances in their final years," he explained during our initial discussion. "People who spent decades serving others, making responsible financial decisions, suddenly finding themselves housing insecure due to circumstances beyond their control. It's not just tragic, it's a societal failure." His passion for the issue aligned perfectly with the Foundation's mission, and over several meetings, we developed a framework for how his planned bequest could expand our work, creating an endowment to ensure long-term sustainability, funding direct assistance programs, supporting advocacy efforts for policy changes, and establishing educational initiatives to help older adults avoid common pitfalls leading to housing insecurity. "Your foundation's approach is exactly what I've been looking for," Dr. Anderson told me during our final planning session. "Practical assistance combined with systemic advocacy, informed by lived experience rather than mere academic understanding. Lawrence was right to recommend you." This unexpected development, becoming the designated recipient of another substantial bequest, created a strange symmetry with my own experience receiving Harry's inheritance. The circle was expanding, with Harry's generosity now indirectly enabling others to receive similar support through the Foundation's growing capacity. The ripple effects continued outward, touching lives far beyond what either Harry or Mark could have envisioned when their paths crossed decades earlier. As spring blossomed across Boston, bringing new life to the public garden and energy to the harbor activities visible from my windows, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 18 months. From the despair of foreclosure to the unexpected rescue, from family marginalization to renewed connection, from purposelessness to meaningful engagement through the Foundation and book collaboration, the transformation had been complete and profound. Emma and I completed the manuscript draft in late April, submitting it to several publishers who had expressed serious interest. The writing process had deepened our relationship in ways neither of us had anticipated, creating a partnership of equals that transcended the traditional grandmother-granddaughter dynamic without diminishing the familial bond. Whatever happens with publication, this collaboration has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my professional life, Emma told me as we celebrated the manuscript submission over dinner at a harborside restaurant. I've learned as much from you as from all my academic mentors combined. The learning has been mutual, I assured her. You've given me analytical frameworks that have helped me make sense of my own experiences in entirely new ways. Our conversation drifted to future possibilities, additional writing projects, speaking engagements, sharing our intergenerational perspective, potential research collaborations combining her academic expertise with my foundation connections. The horizon seemed expansive rather than constrained, filled with meaningful opportunities rather than the diminishing options I had feared during those dark days of impending homelessness. In May, Daniel returned to Boston for another consulting project, once again staying in my guest room rather than a hotel. The ease and pleasure of this arrangement confirmed how thoroughly our relationship had healed since the previous year's tensions. I've been thinking about increasing my involvement with the foundation, he mentioned one evening as we enjoyed after-dinner drinks on the balcony. My firm has a pro bono architecture initiative, and elder housing design would align perfectly with their interests. We could potentially develop model plans for accessible, affordable senior housing that respects dignity and independence. His suggestion represented yet another expansion of the ripple effects flowing from Harry's initial gift. Professional expertise now voluntarily offered to address the very issues that had nearly devastated my own later years. The symmetry was both beautiful and profound. That would be an incredible contribution, I told him. The Foundation's direct assistance helps individuals in crisis, but systemic design solutions could prevent many of those crises from occurring in the first place. As summer approached, bringing warmer temperatures and increased harbor activity, I received news that the book Emma and I had written had been accepted by a prestigious university press, known for publishing academically rigorous works, accessible to general readers. The editor's enthusiasm was palpable in her communication. Your intergenerational approach to narrative resilience in late-life transitions is groundbreaking, she wrote in her acceptance letter. The combination of theoretical framework and lived experience creates a powerful resource for both academic and practical application. We anticipate significant interest from gerontology programs, elder care professionals, and the growing market of readers seeking guidance on navigating their own or family members' aging journeys. The validation of our collaborative effort brought a satisfaction distinct from but equal to the Foundation's growing impact. While the Foundation addressed immediate practical needs, the book offered conceptual frameworks and personal insights that might help others navigate their own transitions more effectively. Together, these parallel contributions represented a meaningful legacy emerging from what had initially seemed like the catastrophic ending of my independent life. Approaching the second anniversary of the foreclosure notice that had initiated this extraordinary journey, I stood at the harbor-facing windows of the condominium that was now genuinely mine in every sense. Not just legally, but emotionally and psychologically. The compass rose pin Harry had left in his safe deposit box caught the afternoon light as I absently touched it, reflecting on the strange and winding path that had brought me to this moment of profound gratitude and unexpected fulfillment. My grandchildren had indeed kicked me out when I lost my pension, or at least relegated me to the margins of their lives, accommodated but not embraced. But they hadn't known I had just inherited a fortune that would transform not just my material circumstances, but the very nature of our family relationships, creating space for authentic connection to replace obligatory caregiving. More importantly, they hadn't known, couldn't have known, how this unexpected reversal of fortune would catalyze growth and healing for all of us, challenging assumptions about aging, family responsibility, and the meaning of security that extended far beyond financial considerations. As boats crisscrossed the harbor waters below, their wakes intersecting in patterns of ever-expanding ripples, I thought once more of Harry Jenkins and his quiet, consequential act of generosity. What had begun as personal financial rescue had expanded to touch countless lives through the Foundation's work, the book's potential impact, and the transformed relationships within my own family. My grandchildren had kicked me out when I lost my pension, but they didn't know I had just inherited a fortune that would become not merely personal salvation, but the seed of something larger and more meaningful than any of us could have imagined. During those dark days of crisis and near despair, the compass rose pin gleamed in the late afternoon light, reminding me that life's journey rarely follows expected paths. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with apparent catastrophe. Sometimes being kicked out opens the door to being truly welcomed in, not as a burden, but as a valued and integral part of a family rediscovering what truly matters, beyond mere obligation. And sometimes an inheritance becomes not just financial rescue, but the foundation for a legacy that extends far beyond what either giver or receiver could have envisioned. A Liga,